The morning sun cast long shadows across the reinforced concrete barriers of Haven Ridge, a converted military installation that had become humanity's last bastion in the American Southwest. Commander Sarachan stood atop the eastern watchtower, her weathered hands gripping binoculars as she surveyed the wasteland beyond their perimeter. 3 years had passed since the outbreak began, and the world she once knew had crumbled into a nightmare of shambling corpses and desperate survival. Haven Ridge housed nearly 800 survivors, a mix of military personnel, civilians, and refugees who had managed to reach their gates before the final lockdown. The facility had been transformed from a research station into a fortress, complete with electrified fences, guard towers, and underground tunnels that connected the main buildings. Solar panels glinted on rooftops, providing precious electricity, while carefully tended gardens supplied fresh vegetables to supplement their dwindling supplies. Dr. Marcus Webb, the facility's chief medical officer, approached Sarah with his daily report clutched in trembling hands. His once pristine lab coat now bore permanent stains from countless emergency surgeries and the constant fight to keep their people healthy. "Commander, we've got a problem," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Morrison family in Block C has been showing symptoms. Fever, disorientation, aggressive behavior. I've quarantined them, but we need to consider our protocols." Sarah lowered her binoculars, her stomach knotting with familiar dread. The Morrison family had been model citizens of Haven Ridge, with teenage twins who helped in the communications center and a father who maintained their water purification system. If the infection had somehow breached their defenses, it could mean the end of everything they'd built. Meanwhile, in the communications bunker buried deep beneath the main compound, Elena Rodriguez frantically adjusted radio frequencies, searching for any sign of other survivor communities. Static filled the air, broken occasionally by automated distress signals that had been broadcasting for months from empty cities. Elena had been the facility's primary radio operator since the early days, and she'd watched the world go silent, one transmission at a time. "Haven Ridge to any stations, Haven Ridge to any stations," she broadcast into the void, her voice steady despite the growing desperation in her heart. "This is Elena Rodriguez at coordinates 34.7 north, 106.2 west. We are a survivor community of 800 souls seeking contact with other organized groups. Please respond if you can hear this message." Outside the compound's walls, movement stirred in the abandoned town of Millbrook, 5 miles to the north. What had once been a sleepy desert community was now a hunting ground for the infected, drawn by some primal instinct toward the warmth and life that emanated from Haven Ridge. Among the shambling masses, something different moved with purpose and intelligence. A figure in tattered military fatigues observed the fortress through cracked binoculars, studying the guard rotations and defensive positions with calculating eyes. Back within the compound, 16-year-old Jake Morrison sat in his family's cramped quarters, unaware that he was being watched by medical personnel through a one-way observation window. His twin sister Amy lay on the adjacent cot, her skin pale and clammy, occasionally muttering incoherent words in her fevered sleep. Jake felt the same burning sensation behind his eyes that had plagued him for days, but he'd hidden it from his parents, not wanting to add to their burden. As evening approached, the compound's evening siren echoed across Haven Ridge, signaling the end of another day and the beginning of the night watch. The massive floodlights illuminated the perimeter, casting harsh white light across the killing fields beyond their walls. Security teams took their positions, armed with a mix of military-grade weapons and improvised implements designed to dispatch the infected without wasting precious ammunition. Commander Chen gathered her senior staff in the war room, a converted conference space lined with maps, supply charts, and communication equipment. The faces around the table reflected the weight of their situation. Captain James Mitchell, head of security, whose scarred hands told the story of countless close encounters with the infected; Chief Engineer Patricia Santos, whose innovations had kept their power grid and water systems running; and Supply Coordinator Thomas Gray, whose careful rationing had stretched their resources far beyond what anyone thought possible. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah began, her voice carrying the authority that had held their community together through the darkest times, "we face our greatest challenge yet. The Morrison situation could be an isolated incident, or it could be the beginning of the end. We need to be prepared for either possibility while maintaining hope for our people. The fortress that had protected them for so long suddenly felt more like a prison, its walls designed to keep danger out now potentially trapping them inside with a threat that could destroy them all from within. The sterile white walls of Haven Ridge's quarantine wing had never felt more confining as Dr. Marcus Webb studied the test results spread before him on his desk. 48 hours had passed since the Morrison family had been isolated, and nothing about their condition made sense according to everything he knew about the infection. Jake Morrison's blood work showed elevated white cell counts and unusual protein markers, but no trace of the virus that had decimated humanity. His twin sister Amy displayed similar anomalies, though her symptoms manifested differently, periods of lucidity followed by episodes where she spoke in languages she'd never learned. Commander Sarachan paced outside the observation window, watching the Morrison parents comfort their children through the reinforced glass. "Doctor, I need answers," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled anxiety. "The council is demanding to know if we're dealing with a new strain, and frankly, so am I. We can't afford to lose control of this situation." Webb removed his glasses and rubbed his tired eyes. "Sarah, in all my years of medical practice, I've never seen anything like this. Their symptoms suggest neurological changes, but not the kind associated with typical infection. If anything, their brain activity is increasing rather than deteriorating." Jake's sister mentioned seeing things that haven't happened yet, and Jake himself has been solving complex mathematical problems he should have no knowledge of. 3 floors below in the communications bunker, Elena Rodriguez had been monitoring radio frequencies around the clock, her headphones practically welded to her ears. The coded transmissions she detected were becoming more frequent, following patterns that suggested a countdown to some coordinated event. She'd managed to decode fragments of the messages, revealing references to Phase 3, asset recovery, and most disturbing of all, Haven Ridge termination protocol. "Commander to communications," Elena spoke into her headset, her voice urgent. "I need you down here immediately. The transmissions have changed, and they're specifically mentioning our location." Above ground, the mysterious figure that had been observing Haven Ridge had moved closer under cover of darkness. Colonel Marcus Steele crouched behind the rusted remains of a delivery truck, studying the fortress through night vision goggles. His weathered face bore the scars of countless battles, and his cold gray eyes reflected a calculating intelligence that had kept him alive when so many others had fallen. Behind him, a small team of similarly equipped operatives maintained silent positions, each one a survivor of the military's failed containment operations. Steele pressed a finger to his earpiece and whispered into his throat microphone. "Base, this is Raven. Target facility shows standard defensive postures, but I'm detecting unusual energy signatures from the medical wing. Recommend accelerating timeline for Phase 3. The asset may be developing beyond our projections." Inside the quarantine ward, Jake Morrison sat up suddenly in his bed, his eyes wide with an expression of startling clarity. "Amy," he whispered to his sister, who was curled up on the adjacent cot. "Something's coming. I can feel it in my head, like static electricity before a storm. They want something from us, but they don't understand what we're becoming." Amy turned toward her brother, and for a moment, her fevered expression cleared completely. "I see them too, Jake. Men with guns and radios, surrounding us like wolves. But there are others too, people like us in different places. We're not alone in this change." Dr. Webb, who had been monitoring their conversation through the intercom, felt his blood run cold. The Morrison twins were displaying symptoms he'd only read about in theoretical papers on enhanced human consciousness. If they were somehow evolving rather than dying, it could change everything they understood about the outbreak. Elena burst into the medical wing, her face flushed with urgency. "Commander, we have a problem. I've been tracking those coded transmissions, and they're coming from multiple sources, all moving toward our position. Whatever's planned for Haven Ridge, it's happening soon. The messages reference something called Prometheus assets, and from what I can tell, they're talking about people, not equipment." Sarachan felt the weight of command pressing down on her shoulders like a physical force. The fortress that had protected them for 3 years was suddenly feeling more like a trap, and the threats were multiplying faster than she could track them. The Morrison family's mysterious condition, the approaching coordinated forces, and now the possibility that her own people might be the target of some larger conspiracy, it was almost too much to process. "Lock down all external communications except emergency channels," she ordered. "Double the perimeter guards and arm the civilian volunteers. Whatever's coming for us, we're going to be ready for it." Outside the walls of Haven Ridge, the infected began to stir with unusual purpose, as if responding to some signal only they could hear. The endless night was approaching, and with it, a revelation that would test everything the survivors believed about their world and themselves. The attack came at dawn, just as the night shift was preparing to hand over duties to the day watch. Elena Rodriguez was still hunched over her radio equipment when the first explosion shook the communications bunker, sending coffee spilling across her control panel and knocking her headphones to the floor. Through the static-filled speakers, she could hear the desperate voices of the perimeter guards reporting coordinated breaches along the eastern and northern walls. "This is Watchtower 7, we have massive movement from the Trillion, Jesus Christ, there's hundreds of them." The transmission cut to static, then resumed with the unmistakable sound of gunfire. "They're not moving like normal infected, they're organized, Commander. Someone's directing them." Commander Sarachan sprinted through the underground corridors toward the command center, her boots echoing off the concrete walls as emergency lighting bathed everything in hellish red. The fortress that had stood impregnable for 3 years was under assault, and from the sound of the explosions, their attackers had come prepared. She burst into the command center to find Captain James Mitchell coordinating the defense, his scarred hands moving across tactical displays with practiced efficiency. "Report," Sarah barked, taking her position at the central command station. "Simultaneous attacks on 3 fronts," Mitchell replied, his voice grim. "Eastern perimeter has a breach in Section C, looks like they used some kind of explosive to take out the electrical grid. Northern wall is under heavy pressure from what appears to be a directed horde. But here's the strange part, Commander, the infected are moving in formation, and they're avoiding our kill zones like they know exactly where our weapons are positioned." 3 miles away, Colonel Marcus Steele observed the assault through high-powered binoculars from his elevated position on a rocky outcrop. His weathered face remained impassive as he watched the infected pour through the breach his team had created in Haven Ridge's defenses. The sonic emitters his people had planted during the night were working perfectly, broadcasting the specific frequency patterns that triggered aggressive behavior in the infected while directing them toward predetermined targets. "Phase 3 is proceeding as planned," Steele spoke into his radio. "The infected are providing the distraction we need. Raven team, move to secondary positions and prepare for asset extraction. Remember, we need the subjects alive, both of them." Inside the quarantine wing, Dr. Marcus Webb was experiencing his own crisis as the Morrison twins exhibited increasingly dramatic changes. Jake Morrison's eyes had taken on an almost luminescent quality, and his sister Amy was speaking in a rapid, fluid language that sounded like no human dialect Webb had ever encountered. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to be communicating with each other without speaking, their synchronized movements suggesting some form of telepathic connection. "Doctor," Jake said suddenly, his voice carrying an eerie calm despite the chaos erupting around them, "the men outside aren't here for the infected. They're here for us. Amy and I can feel their intentions, they want to study us, to use what we're becoming." Amy nodded, her fevered eyes focusing on Webb with startling clarity. "We can hear them thinking about laboratories and experiments. They've done this before, Doctor. Other communities, other people like us. They take what they need and leave nothing behind." The breach in Section C widened as more infected poured through the gap, their shambling forms moving with an unnatural coordination that sent chills down the spines of the defending guards. Among them, shapes that looked almost human but moved with the fluid grace of predators began to emerge, infected that had somehow retained higher brain functions while gaining enhanced physical capabilities. Elena's voice crackled through the communication system, "Commander, I'm picking up tactical radio chatter on military frequencies. Whoever's out there, they're not just using the infected as a distraction, they have human operatives moving toward the medical wing. I think the Morrison family is their primary target." The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. The timing of the Morrison family's illness, the coordinated attack, the sophisticated tactics, it was all connected. Someone had been planning this operation for weeks, possibly months, using the infected as both a weapon and a cover for their true objective. All units, fall back to secondary defensive positions, Sarah commanded. Priority 1 is protecting the medical wing. Whatever's happening to the Morrison family, we cannot let it fall into hostile hands. In the quarantine room, Jake Morrison stood up from his bed, his movements fluid and controlled despite days of apparent illness. "Amy, can you feel them getting closer?" he asked his sister, who nodded while her eyes remained closed in concentration. "I can sense their thoughts," Amy replied. "They're afraid of what we're becoming, but they want to control it. They don't understand that this isn't a disease, it's evolution." The infected continued to pour through the breach, but now their purpose was clear. They weren't just mindless monsters seeking flesh, they were being used as unwitting soldiers in a war for the future of human consciousness itself. The infected had breached the inner courtyard of Haven Ridge, their grotesque forms shambling between the solar panels and supply buildings while gunfire echoed from every direction. Commander Sarachin found herself trapped in a nightmare scenario, fighting a war on multiple fronts while her own fortress crumbled around her. The security teams had managed to seal off the main residential areas, but dozens of infected roamed the industrial sections, and worse yet, her motion sensors were detecting organized human movement approaching the medical wing. Dr. Marcus Webb barricaded himself inside the quarantine lab with the Morrison twins, his hands shaking as he prepared emergency blood samples from both Jake and Amy. The preliminary analysis he'd completed an hour earlier had revealed something that defied every medical principle he understood. Their blood contained antibodies that not only resisted the infection but seemed to actively reverse its effects. If he could synthesize these antibodies, it might be possible to create a cure, but the process required specialized equipment that was currently under siege. "Doctor," Jake Morrison said, his voice unnaturally calm despite the chaos outside, "you need to understand what's happening to us. Amy and I aren't just immune, we're becoming something new. The people attacking us, they've been tracking others like us for months. We can feel their memories, their experiences, through some kind of shared consciousness." Amy nodded, her eyes now glowing with the same luminescent quality as her brother's. "They call us Prometheus assets. There are others scattered across the country, all experiencing similar changes. The military group hunting us believes they can weaponize our abilities, turn our evolution into a tool for control." 3 floors above, Captain James Mitchell led a desperate firefight against infected that had somehow learned to use simple tools and coordinate their attacks. His security team had fallen back to the main corridor leading to the medical wing, but ammunition was running low, and the infected seemed to sense their weakness. What disturbed him most was their behavior. These weren't the mindless creatures they'd fought before. They moved with purpose, testing defenses and falling back when met with heavy resistance, almost as if they were learning from each engagement. "Commander," Mitchell's voice crackled through the radio, "we've got a serious problem up here. These infected are exhibiting tactical awareness. They're using the bodies of fallen ones as shields and coordinating flanking maneuvers. It's like they're being directed by something with military training." Elena Rodriguez, still locked in the communications bunker, had been monitoring the tactical frequencies used by their attackers. What she discovered made her blood run cold. The assault team wasn't just after the Morrison twins. They had detailed intelligence about Haven Ridge's layout, security protocols, and even the location of their emergency supplies. Someone had been feeding them information from inside the fortress. "Commander Chen," Elena's voice transmitted through the emergency channel, "we have a mole. The attackers know too much about our internal systems. Someone's been providing them with classified information about our defenses and the Morrison family's condition." The revelation sent shockwaves through the command structure. Sarachin felt the weight of betrayal crushing down on her as she realized that their sanctuary had been compromised from within. The timing was too perfect, the intelligence too detailed. Someone among her trusted inner circle had been working with Colonel Steele's organization. In the quarantine lab, Dr. Webb made a desperate decision. "Jake, Amy, I need you to listen carefully. Your blood contains the key to stopping this plague, but I can't synthesize it here under these conditions. We need to get you to the backup laboratory in the lower levels, but that means moving through hostile territory. Jake stood up, his movements fluid and controlled despite the ongoing transformation. Doctor, we don't need to run. Amy and I can feel the infected throughout the building, their consciousness is chaotic but manageable. We think we can influence them, turn them away from attacking our people. It's dangerous, Amy added, her voice echoing with harmonics that seemed to resonate from somewhere beyond normal human vocal cords. If we reach out to them mentally, we might lose ourselves in their collective hunger. But if we don't try, everyone in Haven Ridge will die, either from the infected or from the people who want to capture us. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the medical wing's corridors, not the shuffling gait of the infected, but the measured pace of trained soldiers. Colonel Steele's extraction team had penetrated the fortress's inner defenses and was closing in on their primary objective. Dr. Webb looked at the Morrison twins, seeing in their transformed features both the hope for humanity's future and the terrifying uncertainty of evolution itself. Whatever you're going to do, you need to do it now. We're out of time. Outside the quarantine lab, the shadows of armed figures moved with deadly precision through the smoke-filled corridors, their mission clear and their methods ruthless. The battle for Haven Ridge had become a battle for the future of human consciousness, and the outcome would determine whether humanity evolved or became extinct. The armored figure of Colonel Marcus Steele stepped through the smoke-filled corridors of Haven Ridge's medical wing, his tactical gear gleaming under the emergency lighting. Behind him, 3 heavily armed operatives moved with the precision of a military unit that had performed this type of extraction countless times before. Their faces were hidden behind advanced combat masks that filtered the air and provided enhanced visual displays, but their body language spoke of cold professionalism and absolute determination. Commander Sarah Chen's voice echoed through the facility's intercom system, her words carrying the weight of impossible decisions. This is Commander Chen to all Haven Ridge personnel. We are under siege by hostile forces seeking to capture members of our community for unknown purposes. All civilians are to remain in designated safe areas while security teams maintain defensive positions. In the quarantine lab, Dr. Marcus Webb had barricaded the door with medical equipment while the Morrison twins stood together in the center of the room, their eyes closed in deep concentration. The air around them seemed to shimmer with an energy that made Webb's instruments register fluctuations in electromagnetic fields. Jake and Amy Morrison were no longer just patients, they had become something unprecedented in human evolution. Doctor, Jake said without opening his eyes, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate from multiple sources, we can feel every infected creature in the building. Their consciousness is fragmented, filled with rage and hunger, but underneath that chaos, there's still something human. We think we can reach them. Amy's luminescent eyes opened suddenly, focusing on Webb with an intensity that made him step backward. The soldiers are 3 corridors away. They have orders to take us alive, but they're prepared to eliminate anyone who interferes. Colonel Steele believes our abilities can be replicated, turned into weapons for his organization. The intercom crackled to life with Colonel Steele's voice, cold and authoritative. Commander Chen, I am Colonel Marcus Steele representing a classified government continuity program. You are harboring assets critical to national security. Surrender the Morrison subjects immediately, and your community will be spared. You have 10 minutes to comply. Sarah Chen stood in the command center, surrounded by her senior staff, each face reflecting the impossible nature of their situation. Captain Mitchell's security report painted a grim picture. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting on multiple fronts. The infected had been contained to specific sections of the facility, but Steele's team was systematically advancing toward the medical wing with military precision. Commander, Elena Rodriguez's voice came through the communication system. I've been monitoring Steele's radio traffic. This isn't just about Haven Ridge. They've been conducting similar operations across the country, targeting communities that harbor people showing enhanced abilities. From what I can decode, they've already extracted subjects from at least 7 other settlements. The revelation hit the command staff like a physical blow. Haven Ridge wasn't just under attack, they were part of a systematic campaign to capture and study evolved humans. The Morrison twins weren't unique anomalies, they were part of a larger transformation occurring across the species. Dr. Webb made a desperate decision as the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder outside the barricaded lab. "Jake, Amy, if you're going to attempt contact with the infected, it has to be now. But I need you to understand the risks. If you lose yourselves in their collective consciousness, there may be no way back." Jake reached out and took his sister's hand, their combined energy creating visible ripples in the air around them. "We understand, Doctor. But if we don't try, everyone here dies, and we become prisoners of people who see us as weapons rather than human beings." The twins closed their eyes and extended their consciousness outward, touching the chaotic minds of the infected throughout Haven Ridge. What they found was a nightmare landscape of fragmented memories, overwhelming hunger, and barely contained rage. But beneath the madness, traces of human consciousness remained, trapped, terrified, but still present. "We can feel them," Amy whispered, her voice strained with effort. "The infected remember who they were. Some part of them is still fighting against what they've become. If we can reach that part, maybe we can turn them away from our people." Colonel Steele's voice echoed through the facility once more, his patience clearly at an end. "Commander Chen, your time is up. My teams are moving to secure the assets. Any resistance will be met with lethal force. This is your final warning." The moment of truth had arrived. Sarah Chen looked at her staff, seeing in their faces the same determination that had kept Haven Ridge alive for 3 years against impossible odds. They had built something worth protecting, a community that represented hope for humanity's future. "All units," Sarah commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them, "prepare for final defensive positions. We do not surrender our people to anyone. Haven Ridge stands, no matter the cost." In the quarantine lab, the Morrison twins began their most dangerous gamble yet, reaching into the minds of the infected to turn humanity's greatest threat into its salvation. Elena Rodriguez's radio equipment erupted with incoming transmissions as static gave way to clear, coordinated voices from across the wasteland. "Haven Ridge, this is Sanctuary Base calling from Colorado. We've been monitoring your situation and are moving to assist. ETA 40 minutes with armored convoy and air support." The message was followed by 2 more communities identifying themselves, Iron Creek Settlement from Nevada and Fort Resilience from New Mexico. Each reported similar experiences with evolved individuals and hostile extraction teams. Elena's hands flew across her controls as she coordinated the most complex multi-community operation attempted since the outbreak began. "Commander," Elena called through the intercom, her voice electric with hope, "we're not alone. 3 allied settlements are converging on our position with heavy weapons and personnel. They've been tracking Steele's organization for months, and they're ready to fight." In the quarantine lab, Jake and Amy Morrison had entered a trance-like state, their consciousness expanded far beyond the confines of their physical bodies. Dr. Webb monitored their vital signs with growing amazement and terror as their brain activity spiked to levels that should have been impossible for human physiology. The twins were reaching into the collective mind of every infected creature within a 10-mile radius. "I can see them all," Amy whispered, her voice distant and ethereal. Hundreds of fractured minds, trapped between memory and madness. They remember their families, their homes, their humanity. The infection didn't destroy their consciousness, it buried it under layer upon layer of primal hunger. Jake's luminescent eyes snapped open, focusing on Dr. Webb with startling clarity. "Doctor, we need you to understand what we're about to attempt. If we can restore enough human consciousness to the infected, we can turn them from weapons into allies. But the process requires us to share our neural patterns with them, and that means we might lose ourselves permanently in their collective mind." 3 corridors away, Colonel Steele's extraction team had reached the medical wing's outer security checkpoint. The colonel studied the barricaded doors through his tactical display, noting the sophisticated defensive positions and the energy readings that suggested the Morrison subjects were using their abilities. His weathered face remained impassive, but his gray eyes reflected the cold calculation of a man who had never failed a mission. "Raven team, prepare breaching charges," Steele commanded through his throat microphone. "The subjects are exhibiting higher activity levels than projected. We need to secure them before their abilities develop beyond our containment protocols. Above ground, the first signs of the approaching Allied convoy appeared on Haven Ridge's horizon, dust clouds kicked up by armored vehicles moving at high speed across the desert terrain. Commander Sarachan watched through binoculars from the command center, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and disbelief. After 3 years of isolation, help was finally coming. Captain Mitchell's voice crackled through the radio from his defensive position. "Commander, the infected in our perimeter are behaving strangely. They've stopped attacking our positions and seem to be waiting for something. It's like they're listening to a signal we can't hear." The answer came from the quarantine lab, where the Morrison twins had achieved something unprecedented in human evolution. Their combined consciousness had touched the minds of nearly 300 infected individuals, finding the buried remnants of human awareness and slowly, carefully, beginning to restore cognitive function. "It's working," Jake said, his voice strained with the enormous mental effort. "We can feel their memories returning, names, faces, purposes beyond hunger. Some of them are remembering how to communicate, how to think beyond basic survival instincts." Dr. Webb watched in amazement as his instruments detected organized neural activity patterns emanating from the twins and spreading outward like ripples in a pond. The electromagnetic signature was unlike anything in medical literature, two human minds acting as a transmission source for collective consciousness restoration. Elena's radio erupted with a new transmission, this one from Colonel Steele's forces. "All units, Operation Prometheus is encountering unprecedented resistance. Subject abilities have exceeded all projections. Request immediate reinforcement and upgraded containment protocols." The response came from a cold, clinical voice that made Elena's blood run cold. "Negative, Colonel. Expendable assets only. If subjects cannot be contained safely, terminate and salvage what biological material is possible. The program cannot risk exposure." The transmission revealed the true horror of Steele's mission. The evolved humans weren't valuable as individuals, but as test subjects whose abilities could be harvested and replicated. The Morrison twins weren't prisoners to be captured, they were specimens to be dissected. Amy Morrison's eyes opened wide, glowing with an intensity that filled the room with soft light. "Jake, we're not just connecting with the infected. We're linking with others like us, evolved humans across the country who are fighting back against Steele's organization. We're not alone, and we're not the first to discover these abilities." The sound of approaching helicopters filled the air as Sanctuary Base's aerial support arrived over Haven Ridge, while underground, the twins continued their desperate attempt to turn humanity's greatest threat into its salvation. The dawn sky above Haven Ridge exploded with the thunder of rotor blades as 3 military helicopters from Sanctuary Base descended through clouds of smoke and debris. Their door gunners opened fire on Colonel Steele's extraction teams, forcing the tactical units to scatter and seek cover among the fortress's outer buildings. The cavalry had arrived, but the battle for humanity's future was just beginning. Commander Sarachan coordinated the defense from her command center, watching multiple tactical displays as Allied ground forces breached Haven Ridge's outer perimeter from 3 directions. Iron Creek Settlement's armored convoys smashed through the northern barriers while Fort Resilience's assault teams rappelled from helicopters directly onto the fortress's central courtyards. The isolated community had become the epicenter of the largest coordinated survivor operation since the outbreak began. In the quarantine lab, Jake and Amy Morrison had achieved something that defied every known law of neuroscience and biology. Their combined consciousness now extended across a network of nearly 800 infected individuals scattered throughout the region, each one slowly remembering fragments of their former humanity. The process was exhausting and dangerous. Several times, the twins had nearly lost themselves in the chaotic collective mind of the infected masses. "Doctor," Jake gasped, his luminescent eyes flickering with the strain of maintaining so many mental connections, "we can feel them fighting back against the primal hunger. Some of them are remembering their names, their families, their purposes before the infection. But the neural pathways are damaged. We need to create a permanent bridge between their restored consciousness and their physical bodies." Dr. Webb had been working frantically to synthesize the twins' unique neural proteins into a viable serum. The makeshift laboratory equipment wasn't designed for this level of biochemical engineering, but desperation had driven him to attempt procedures that would have been considered impossible under normal circumstances. Vials of luminescent fluid lined his workbench, each one containing the potential to restore human consciousness to the infected. "The serum is ready for testing," Webb announced, his hands shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline. "But Jake, Amy, the process requires you to maintain mental contact with the subject during injection. If something goes wrong, if the serum causes neural rejection, the feedback could destroy your own consciousness." Amy reached out and grasped her brother's hand, their combined energy creating visible ripples in the air around them. "We understand the risks, Doctor. But if we can prove that restoration is possible, it changes everything. The infected aren't lost, they're just trapped. We can free them all." Above ground, the battle raged with unprecedented intensity as 3 armies converged on Haven Ridge. Colonel Steele's forces had been joined by additional extraction teams armed with advanced sonic weapons designed specifically to disrupt the neural frequencies that evolved humans used to communicate. The weapons' effects were devastating. Several Allied fighters collapsed in agony as the devices scrambled their enhanced consciousness. Elena Rodriguez had established communication links between all 4 communities, creating a tactical network that allowed unprecedented coordination. "All units, be advised that hostile forces are using sonic disruption weapons targeting enhanced individuals. Evolved personnel should maintain maximum distance from enemy positions." The first test subject was brought to the quarantine lab, a recently infected Haven Ridge resident who had been captured during the initial breach. The woman had been a teacher before the outbreak, and fragments of her memories were still accessible to the Morrison twins' enhanced perception. She lay strapped to a medical table, her eyes vacant but occasionally flickering with traces of recognition when Jake spoke her name. "Sarah Patterson," Jake said softly, his consciousness gently touching the edges of her fragmented mind. "You taught 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary. You had a garden with sunflowers and tomatoes. You remember reading stories to children who loved to hear your voice." Amy injected the neural restoration serum into the woman's foreline while maintaining telepathic contact with her brother. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Sarah Patterson's eyes suddenly focused with crystal clarity, and she began to speak coherently for the first time since her infection. Where am I?" she whispered, her voice weak but undeniably human. "I remember being so hungry, so angry, but I couldn't control it. There were others with me, hundreds of us, all trapped in the same nightmare." The success sent shockwaves through the medical team, but there was no time to celebrate. Colonel Steele's forces had breached the medical wing's outer defenses, and the sound of gunfire was growing closer. The procedure had worked, but scaling it up to treat hundreds of infected individuals would require resources and time they didn't have. "Commander," Elena's voice crackled through the intercom, "satellite imagery shows massive infected hordes converging on our position from all directions. But here's the strange part, they're not attacking the Allied forces. It's like they're responding to some kind of signal." Jake Morrison smiled despite the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm him. "They're responding to us. Every infected individual we've touched is calling to others, spreading the message that restoration is possible. They're coming here not to feed, but to be saved." 6 months after the Battle of Haven Ridge, Commander Sarachan stood atop the expanded fortress walls, watching the morning sun illuminate a landscape that bore little resemblance to the wasteland that had surrounded them during the siege. Where once infected hordes had shambled through abandoned towns, thriving communities now flourished under the guidance of restored individuals who remembered both their humanity and their time in the collective consciousness of the infected. The victory had come at tremendous cost. Colonel Steele lay buried in an unmarked grave beyond the fortress walls, his extraction teams either dead or captured during the final assault. His sonic weapons had been destroyed, and the shadowy organization he represented had gone silent after losing their primary field commander. But more importantly, the Morrison twins had proven that evolution and restoration could coexist, that humanity's future lay not in fighting the infected, but in healing them. Jake and Amy Morrison had survived their neural linking procedure, though both bore permanent changes from their experience. Their eyes retained a luminescent quality that marked them as evolved humans, and their ability to communicate telepathically had grown stronger rather than weaker. They had become bridges between the old world and the new, helping other evolved individuals across the continent discover and control their abilities. Dr. Marcus Webb's medical bay had been transformed into a research facility that would have been impossible to imagine during the dark years of the outbreak. The neural restoration serum had been refined and mass-produced, with distribution networks established between allied communities spanning from California to Florida. The process wasn't perfect, some infected individuals were too far gone to restore completely, but the success rate exceeded 80% when administered within the first year of infection. Commander Elena Rodriguez called from the communications center, her voice bright with excitement that had become commonplace since the restoration process began. I'm receiving confirmations from 17 communities today. Portland Settlement has successfully restored their first 100 individuals, and they're reporting that many are choosing to stay and help rebuild rather than searching for their original families. The psychological implications of restoration had proven as complex as the medical ones. Many restored individuals carried memories of their time as infected, the hunger, the violence, the loss of control, that required extensive counseling and support. But they also possessed unique insights into the collective consciousness that had connected all infected individuals, knowledge that was proving invaluable in preventing future outbreaks. Sarah Patterson, the first successfully restored individual, had become Haven Ridge's Director of Reintegration Services. Her experience as both human and infected gave her unparalleled understanding of the psychological challenges faced by restored individuals. She worked closely with Dr. Webb to develop treatment protocols that addressed not just the physical aspects of restoration, but the emotional trauma of remembering actions taken without conscious control. The infected state wasn't evil, Sarah often told groups of newly restored individuals during orientation sessions. It was illness, a neurological condition that trapped our consciousness while our bodies acted on primitive impulses. Understanding that distinction is crucial to healing from the experience. The economic and social structures of the post-outbreak world had been revolutionized by the restoration process. Communities that had once focused solely on defense and survival were now centers of education and research. The enhanced cognitive abilities displayed by some evolved humans had accelerated scientific advancement, leading to breakthroughs in renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, and medical technology that surpassed pre-outbreak achievements. Jake Morrison stood in the memorial garden that had been built where the quarantine lab once operated, reading the names carved into stone monuments honoring those who had died during the siege. His sister Amy approached quietly, her presence felt telepathically before she spoke aloud. The network is growing stronger, Amy said, referring to the loose collective consciousness that connected evolved humans across the continent. We're receiving contact requests from communities as far away as Alaska and Mexico. The restoration process is spreading faster than we ever imagined possible. Elena's voice echoed across the fortress courtyard through the public address system. Attention Haven Ridge, this is your daily broadcast to survivor communities worldwide. Today marks the 200th day of continuous restoration operations. Current statistics show over 50,000 successfully restored individuals across 47 allied communities. The infection mortality rate has dropped to less than 2% in regions with active restoration programs. Commander Chen smiled as she listened to the broadcast, remembering the desperate radio calls for help that Elena had sent during the darkest days of the siege. Those calls had evolved into a network of hope that spanned continents, with restored individuals serving as living proof that humanity's future was brighter than anyone had dared imagine. The sun climbed higher over Haven Ridge, its light reflecting off the solar panels that now powered not just their own community, but a growing network of allied settlements. The age of survival was ending, and the age of restoration had begun. Humanity had not just survived the outbreak, it had evolved beyond it, emerging stronger and more united than ever before in its history.